Bava Kamma, Daf Yomi BAVA. Foreseeing consequence, lo yegdel adam kelev ra. We'll understand some interesting things, but among them is the Rambam, where he deals with the sections of, particularly of murder, has a section in his Sefer called Hilchot Rotzeach Ushmirat HaNefesh, the laws of murder and protecting of the nefesh. And it's a strange title. Hilchot Rotzeach would have been fine, the laws of murder, which includes not murdering and protecting people and so on. But we'll see that Shmirat Nefesh means more than physical protection and avoiding not killing and so on, because this goes, as we've seen in the whole Masechta, the part of the idea of learning the laws of damages is to become increasingly sensitive to damage and to how one could potentially damage another person and how to avoid damaging and what happens in the event that you have damaged something. But that sense of damage goes beyond damaging other people. It also goes to the level, as we'll see today, of damaging oneself. And not only damaging oneself physically, but damaging oneself spiritually as well. All of that fits into the laws of damages when we look at it from a moral and an ethical and a Torah perspective, as we've been talking about Bava Kamma all the time, that it has these two dimensions that you're always going to be looking at it through the legal dimension of the laws of damages, and then the much more subtle area of the moral obligations and the ethical obligations around the laws of damages, which includes spiritual damage and includes damage not only to others, but includes damage also to oneself. The posuk that we deal with is a posuk in Parshas Ki Tetzeh, Ki tivneh bayit chadash, if you build a new house, ve'asita ma'akeh legagecha, you have to build a fence around the top. They used to have flat roofs in those days, like we have in apartment buildings. And you need to make sure there's a wall around that flat area. V'lo tasim damim beveitecha, so that you won't be responsible for the shedding of blood in your house. Ki yipol hanofel mimenu, in case somebody falls off the roof. That's your responsibility, to be able to foresee that possibility, that somebody could be there and maybe not realize and come too close to the edge and not realize how steep the edge is, or it's nighttime and he doesn't see. You've got to think of that ahead of time and build a wall around it. Explains Targum Onkelos, what does v'lo tasim damim beveitecha means? V'lo tashvei chovat ktol beveitecha. Don't build your house in such a way that you could be guilty of murder, that you could be guilty of causing somebody else's death. So we're not worried about the actual death. We're worried about your house containing within it something that could result in your culpability in the death of another person. That becomes important, as we'll see. Our Gemara says, Tanya, we learned in a Braisa Rabbi Nosson Omer, Minayin shelo yegdel adam kelev ra betoch beito. Where do you know from that you're not allowed to have a vicious dog in your house? You're not allowed to keep a vicious pet. And you shouldn't keep a flimsy ladder in your house. You can't say, but I don't use it, it's locked away, nobody uses it. Its existence is problematic. And we see that from the Onkelos, Lo tashvei chovat ktol beveitecha. Don't have something, this is not about the death, the fact that somebody might die. It's about you having something in your house which is an instrument of potential death. That's what you need to be careful of. So you're not allowed to leave a ladder which is shaky, which is flimsy in your house. Where do we know that from? Talmud lomar lo tasim damim beveitecha. This law that says you've got to build a fence around your roof, and it goes on, velo tasim damim beveitecha, and you shall not have in your house something which could cause loss of life. That's what the issur is. There's an important Rabbeinu Bechai, because this raises such an interesting theological question. The theological question it raises is, I'm not killing anybody, I'm building a house. There's a flat roof on the house. Nobody's supposed to be going onto that flat roof except me, and I know that it's a roof and I know that it's dangerous. If somebody else does go onto that roof and falls off the roof, it's b'shirt. Why do we say b'shirt only when good things happen to people? What happens when bad things happen to people? A person has good fortune, he wins at the lottery, we say it was b'shirt. He was like, Hashem helped him. So what happens if you lose in business, or you, chas v'shalom, somebody falls off the roof, say it's b'shirt. Why is it my fault? Explains Rabbeinu Bechaya, although Ra'ui haya lipol misheshet yimei breshit, this person was destined to fall from the 6 days of creation. This was built into the Bria. History is going to unfold whether or not you're active. Things are going to happen whether or not you're active in it. Your choice is, do you want to be an active participant in the unfolding of history? And that applies both for good things and for bad things. The war that we're fighting at the moment in Eretz Yisrael is a war that was destined to happen. This was going to happen no matter what. Our choice is, what part of it do we want to stand by as an observer? Do we want to interfere with it? Or do we want to support and help it? That's our choice, but we're not going to change history. History is going to happen. Everybody is created with free will. This Rabbeinu Bechaya, and we'll see in the Sefer HaChinuch as well, these are foundational to our belief system. והקדוש ברוך הוא דיים בראשית הבריאה כל עניינם כולם וכל המקרים העתידים לבוא עליהם וכן הודיעם ימי חייהם ומיתתם איך תהיה. Before we were born, Hashem told our souls exactly what was going to happen. No surprises to the soul. What's going to happen, the good things, the bad things, how long we're going to live, when we're going to die, how we're going to die. The soul was told it all beforehand. And how much money you're going to make. Is it going to be easy or difficult? Are you going to make it yourself, or are you going to work for other people? All of that is told to the neshama beforehand. Etc. And the souls all said, we agree, we accept. We've already accepted what's going to happen to us. However, if you cause the person's death, that you have a punishment for. Not because you killed him, he was going to die in any case, but because you chose to participate in that death of the other person. It's like Paro being responsible for the suffering to the Jews, even though Hashem already told us that we were going to be in a foreign nation and they were going to oppress us. So Paro was just fulfilling Hashem's will. He didn't have to fulfill Hashem's will. Somebody else could have done it. The choice to be the agent of good or bad. If you choose to be the agent of good, there's schar. If you choose to be the agent of bad, there's onesh. But you are not the person doing it, you're just the agent. The Rambam says in Sefer HaMitzvot, HaMitzvah, hi shetzivanu lahasir hamichsholim v'asakanot b'chol moshavenu. This is a mitzvat aseh that goes beyond the ma'akeh. This is not just about building a fence, but this is about removing michsholim, moving potential damage from our homes, making sure that there's nothing in our home that could cause damage. Like building a wall around the roof and so on. And this is discussed in Bava Kamma Daf Tesvav. Says the Sefer HaChinuch, so there are various different sforim that were written by the Rishonim listing the mitzvot and defining them. The one is the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvah, where he defines this as a mitzvat aseh. This is a positive mitzvah, not a negative mitzvah. It's a positive mitzvah to build a ma'akeh, and similarly, it is a positive mitzvah to remove potential damage. That's not a negative mitzvah, it's a positive mitzvah. The Sefer HaChinuch says in this mitzvah, in Taf Kuf Mem Vav, Hashem knows everything that's going to happen to everybody. And whatever happens to a person, that's predetermined. Again, this Sefer HaChinuch, the Rabbeinu Bechaya, important, critical things to learn and to know when people ask you and you discuss and you're troubled yourselves by these questions of free will and predetermination. You don't even move your little finger without it being decreed from above. But nevertheless, just as I must prevent somebody else from falling off my roof, I must prevent myself from being damaged. I can't just say it's all b'shet, it's all v'ad ribono shalom. I need to take steps to protect myself. Because Hashem set the world in motion using the algorithms of nature. And Hashem decided, He created the world in such a way that fire burns, and water puts out a fire. If a big rock falls on a person's head, it will smash his head. If a person pushes somebody off a tall building and he falls down, he will die. And Hashem gave us intuitive, instinctual protection. He gave us an instinct of survival to help us manage nature. And we've got to do that. And since Hashem made our bodies subject to the laws of nature, so we've got to be careful to avoid what nature could do to us. That's a mitzvah in the Torah, to take steps to avoid harm to ourselves. And then he goes on to say, there are some individuals who've overcome nature. Avraham Avinu and Mishal Hananiah and Azariah, and he gives examples of people who through history have mastered nature and are able to control nature rather than be controlled by nature. But he says those are very few people, and the rest of us have to take cognizance of nature and take the steps necessary to protect ourselves from physical harm. There are many mitzvahs that Chazal have given us, the Rabbanans, to protect us from harm. And he lists a number of them that apply. One of them is the din of galui, for example, that you don't drink, certainly in those days, you don't drink liquid that has been left uncovered overnight because insects and poisonous things get into them. There are things that we've got to do to take care. We don't just say, well, Hashem, it's Hashem's thing, I'm drinking whatever I want, and if I am poisoned, that's from Hashem. We've got to take the necessary steps. Let's get to the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah. So the Rambam, in his counting of the mitzvahs, counts this as a positive mitzvah. Says the Rambam, mitzvat aseh la'asot adam ma'akeh legago shene'amar v'asita ma'akeh legagecha. It's a mitzvah aseh to build a fence around your roof. Fine. In Halacha Gimel, this is Hilchos Rotzeach U'Shmirat HaNefesh Perik Yud Aleph, in Halacha Gimel, v'chol ha'meliach gago belo ma'akeh. And what happens if you didn't? You built a house and you didn't put a fence around the roof. Bitel mitzvat aseh. You have not fulfilled the positive mitzvah which you've been told to do to build the fence, and you didn't build the fence. V'yavara lo ta'aseh, but there's also a lo ta'aseh. What's the lo ta'aseh? V'lo tasim damim beveitecha. We've got the lo ta'aseh from our Gemara. Don't build into your house something that can cause death, that can cause injury to people. That's lo ta'asim, that's a lo ta'aseh. Ve'ein lokin, so why does the Rambam not include that in the counting of the mitzvot? He only counts it as a positive mitzvah. Why doesn't the Rambam count this also as a negative mitzvah that you've got to be careful of? Because there's no action involved, and he only counts the mitzvah lo ta'aseh if there's an action involved. So here, this is an act of omission, not commission. You didn't build a fence. That's the lo ta'aseh. So if you didn't build a fence, you have forgone the mitzvah aseh, the positive mitzvah you have not observed, and you've transgressed the negative mitzvah. But the negative mitzvah is a passive negative mitzvah. It's a lo ta'aseh of omission. You didn't do what you were meant to do. In Halacha Dalet, he says an amazing things. This is not only about building fences on roofs, anything which can cause harm. Mitzvat aseh la'asiro li'shameh mimenu lizahem bedavar yafeh yafeh. It's important to remove any such things that could cause harm and be very, very careful about it, says the Rambam. Unusual words. The Rambam is careful with every word. Yafeh. It doesn't say lizaher. He says, but yafeh, and not just yafeh, but yafeh, yafeh. Be very, very careful. Shene'emar, he brings a strange posuk, which we'll see in a moment. Hisham elecha u'shmor nafshecha. Another posuk altogether. Be very careful. And if you do not remove the michsholot, then you've been over the mitzvah lo ta'aseh, and you've been over on lo tasim damim, you're not permitted to cause death. So there are three psukim. There's the one around the ma'akeh, there's one around the fence on the roof, and there's the one in Parshas Va'etchanan, Yishameh lecha u'shmor nafshecha. And what is that posuk? It's talking about a different thing altogether. What's it talking about over there? It's talking about be very careful not to forget what you've learned. Don't forget your Torah. That's what the mitzvah is there. Be careful. And Rabbeinu Bechaya says that's not an issur to forget. So if you've forgotten something, you have not been over an issur d'oraisa. What it means is don't do things which cause you to forget. Don't engage in activities that take your mind off the Torah and can cause you to forget something. That's what you need to be careful of. Be careful where you put your head. Because if you put your mind in things that are too trivial for long periods of time, you will forget what you've learned, and that's an issue. To take your mind somewhere that causes shikha, So how does the Rambam see from there? That's got nothing to do with murder, it's got nothing to do with fences, it's got nothing to do with things that can cause death, it's something else altogether. What the Rambam learns from there is that the din of shmirat nefesh, of taking care of your soul, applies not only to your physical soul, but your spiritual soul as well. Don't forget Torah. And the Torah uses the word hishamer lecha ushmor nafshecha. It's the same word as if your life is dependent on it. So when we think about protect yourself not only from physical harm, protect yourself from spiritual harm as well. That's part of it, and that's why it's hilchot rotzeach ushmirat nefesh. That it's about not murdering people and not causing spiritual harm to people or to yourself. That's all part of the section of halakha. And therefore, if a person doesn't remove those harmful things, whether it's the vicious animal that he has as a pet, or it's the fence around the thing, if there's damaging of the ladder that is fragile in your house, any of these things, if you don't remove them, what you're not doing here is hishamer lecha ushmor nafshecha ma'od. And this really is the basis of zehirut. Zehirut is the Mesilas Yeshorim in the price of Rabbi Pinchas ben Yoel. We've referred to it before in the beginning of Bava Kamma. Zehirut is the first step of spiritual development, of ethical development. After you've learned Torah, the Mesilas Yeshorim says the next thing is Zehirut. Zehirut means being cautious. It means being aware, being mindful. Really, Zehirut means being mindful. Being mindful of what? We've spoken before about second and third order consequence. That when you're about to do something, don't just think of the action, think of the result of the action and the result of the action. As the Mesilas Yeshorim says in Perik Bet, Sheyeh Adam nizhar b'ma'asav u'b'inyanav, klomar mitbonen u'mefakeach ha'ma'asav v'derachav ha'tovim im lo. Check what you're going to do. Is this something that you're going to do that is positive or negative? Is it going to have positive consequence or negative consequence? That's the whole of Bava Kamma. Everything we're learning in Bava Kamma is to sensitize us to the potential for damage, and that you are responsible for the damage. It's not just about the monetary responsibility. It's the ethical and the moral responsibility. You are responsible for the damage you cause. So it's not just, so then if you do cause damage, you have to compensate. As we learned in the beginning, no, there's an issur to cause damage. So you've got to make sure that in your activities and in your actions, you're not going to cause damage. You can't say, if I cause damage, I'll take care of it, I'll pay for it. No, you're not allowed to cause damage. You're not allowed to cause damage to somebody else's property. You're not allowed to cause damage to somebody else's life. You're not allowed to cause damage to somebody else's parnasah. And you're not allowed to cause damage to your own life or to your own health or to your own spiritual well-being. All of this is included in this piece of Rambam that we've learned, the degrees to which we go in shmirat nefesh, in being careful in what one does, to be careful not to hurt others, not to damage others, to be concerned and careful about our own health and well-being, just as we are about others. Because although everything is predetermined from Shemayim, it's our choice whether we want to be participants. We're going to live a certain length of time. Do we want to be active in protecting our health, or do we want to just leave it to Hashem? Do we want to be active in protecting somebody else's well-being, or do we just want to leave it to Hashem? That's our bechira. Our bechira is not about what will happen in the world. What will happen in any event. Our bechira is simply the degree to which we want to be the agents of change, and we want to be the agents of people's well-being and the well-being of ourselves.